What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about resistance training, kids, and whether or not it's beneficial and or detrimental to their overall development, both as an athlete and as a human being.
It's all my head, now stuck in the void again.
I actually had something completely different planned to talk about this week. There's a study that came out about hockey strength and conditioning coaches at higher levels of play and what their challenges are, what they focus on, what their training's like. It's really interesting stuff. But I had a parent kind of approach me yesterday about their kids' training, and so I thought this was probably a little bit more pertinent. Actually, about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, I wrote an article about this specific topic, and I'll link it in the description, that goes over the history of where this came from, which is something we're going to talk about today, like the benefits of weight training. And it's been 2 years since I wrote that, so chances are I'm going to present a little bit more information when it comes to all that stuff today, because things have changed a little bit. I've gotten smarter and a little bit more articulate, so lots of information in this video today. But, essentially this parent had some reservations about their kid lifting weights. And I get it. Like, I'm a parent now. My daughter is not old enough for me to have to entrust somebody else with her care just yet. But when it comes time to do that, I imagine I'm going to be a relatively inquisitive individual, and I often forget that I have a lot more information when it comes to this topic, i.e. resistance training in kids, than the vast majority of the general population has. So, trying to talk to parents about this, he was under the impression that it was going to stunt his growth, that it would make him slow, that it would make him too bulky. And there's no evidence at this point to suggest that any of that is true. And we're going to go over a couple different cases, a couple different reasons why people believe this to be truth in 2023, almost 24, when we have just an overabundance of information pointing, to the total opposite of what people think when it comes to resistance training. So we're going to go over what the old wives' tales are, the actual benefits of weight training, where these things come from, because there's actually a pretty interesting story when it comes to the whole stunting your growth, and then, the overall benefits of what weight training can do for young kids. We're going to talk about all that today. All right, so what are the most common things that we hear from parents as strength and conditioning professionals when it comes to their kids and resistance training? One, that it's going to make you slow, right? Because it's not speed, the weights move slow, so it's going to make you slow. Weight training can stunt your growth. That's another very common kind of misconception. Weight training makes you bulky, and we'll go over that as well. And then weight training can actually diminish your flexibility and make you all muscle bound and not able to move very well. That's also another very common, thought process when it comes to this. And in reality, none of that's really true, and we'll kind of go over all this now. So for one, weight training makes you slow. There's no evidence to suggest this at all. Weight training, when we're working with heavier numbers, can in fact move very slow, right? So a new max is going to move incredibly slow, even, above 90% or above 80 or 85% for a lot of kids or a lot of people is going to move relatively slow. It doesn't look like it would transfer to speed, but your speed is going to be a direct reflection of how much force you can put in the ground. So the rate limiting factor of acceleration, and that means for the vast majority of athletes, the first 5 to 8 yards, if they're able to maintain a lean that long and accelerate. You look at the guys running and girls running the 100-meter dash, it's the first quarter of that where they're able to maintain that lean and continue to accelerate. The rate limiting factor of that part of speed is going to be how much force you can put in the ground. All right, as you get into max velocity and you get top end speed where you're upright and you're cycling through, those things change a bit. Hamstring strength plays a huge role, or posterior chain strength altogether plays a very big role in that. But for the most part, when you accelerate, and that's what sports are, is mostly accelerating, decelerating, and reaccelerating, or what we like to call agility. Most sports are that. So that's going to be limited by how much force you can put in the ground. So if I am somebody who can squat 100 pounds, right, I'm going to be able to display X amount of speed. Now, there's some other things that go into that, some of it being elasticity and, things of that nature. But for the most part, speed is going to be a reflection of how strong you are. So if I can take that 100-pound kid, right, and now, over the course of some time, we can squat 150 pounds. Chances are, if I'm also kind of keeping up with those like acceleration mechanics and stuff like that, chances are this kid's going to be faster because now they can put more force into the ground. And as an added bonus, because they're squatting more, they're learning to transfer that force. So not only are they going to be able to put that much more force in the ground, they're going to be able to react off that force and have it transfer through them. So it's like a win-win. It's going to teach them to be more rigid, and it's going to teach them to put more force in the ground, and it's going to allow them to be faster. So strength training will not make you slower if you're strength training like in a manner that's conducive with you actually getting stronger. Right now, it doesn't mean that we can just weight train and end up stronger. We still have to hone some of those other skills to have it impact it, right? The next one, weight training makes you bulky. So for most kids, they don't have the hormonal capacity to get bulky. And to be completely honest, the vast majority of the adult population doesn't have genetics that are conducive with that either. So the odds of you getting bulky are pretty slim. On top of that, and it's funny to me because, parents are like, well, let's do like lighter weight, higher volume. That's how you get bulky. So with adaptations, physiological adaptations, when it comes to training, like mainly hypertrophy or muscle growth, the higher volume stuff is what's going to make that muscle cell larger. So like higher volume, lighter weight stuff is in essence what's going to make you more bulky. It's funny the way that works. So like it's not going to make you bulky. You lack the hormonal capacity for it. You probably lack the training stimulus for it. A lot of the stuff that goes on in these, sports performance and strength and conditioning settings, it's not like bodybuilding type training. I would say most of my athletes in any given lift aren't hitting anywhere. They're not hitting more than 100 reps for sure. And unless we're in like a hypertrophy phase or like a work capacity phase. But for the most part, I mean, like 100 reps, that's not enough to like really grow and get enormous. I've got some kids, they're trying to grow, so we'll give them like high volume finishers where maybe, at the very end, they're hitting some body weight and very, very lightweight movements for upwards of like 150 to 200 reps. But, for the most part, in this setting, the volume is going to be very low because those aren't the adaptations that we're going after. The next one, weight training, diminishing your overall flexibility. And we're going to go into all these in a lot more depth. We're just kind of skimming the surface of all of it here. But weight training, diminishing like your flexibility, there's actually no truth to that at all. A stronger muscle and strength at end ranges is going to yield more mobility, which is going to help to increase your flexibility. Furthermore, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that more strength is going to allow the muscle spindles to calm down and allow your muscle to stretch more, right? And there's a lot more that goes into it. And again, like I said, we'll go over that in a bit. But like, there's no evidence to suggest that you're going to lack mobility. I think where a lot of this comes from is these parents see these like super heavyweight bodybuilders, right? They're big dudes and they look like they can't move very well because their muscles are so big, when in reality, like, first off, like, you'll never get that big. You don't have the genetics for it, and you're not on nearly enough drugs to make it happen. You probably don't have the discipline to eat enough to get that big and sleep enough, everything that goes with it. You will never, ever, ever get that big. I think it was Arnold Schwarzenegger said someone told him, man, like, I don't want to look like you. And he said, well, it doesn't matter because you never will. It's true. Like, to get a level of size, it takes dedication, genetics, and often drugs to get to that size. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get big without drugs. You absolutely can. But when we're talking about that size, probably not going to happen. All right, and the last thing I want to touch on here is that it stunts your growth. And this is absolutely not true at all. It comes from... so where this comes from is like weight training stunting your growth. Doctors for years and years and years said this, right? So where does this come from? It comes from World War II. everyone knows of the concentration camps and the horrifying things that happened in Nazi Germany, but a lot of, like here in the West, we don't really learn a whole lot about the Pacific Front and everything that was happening in China with the Japanese. So there was what was it? It was Unit 731. If you ever like want to be horrified, look into what Unit 731 did. It was very similar to the things that like Joseph Mengele was doing, but it happened with the Chinese and the Japanese as opposed to being in Germany and over in the West. A lot of the same horrific types of things were happening. They were looking into and testing for like biological warfare, in addition to a lot of other things. Believe it or not, we have a remedy for frostbite because of what happened in those prison camps. They would freeze the limbs of these people, the prisoners, and they would put them in various stages of different temperatures, water, not water, trying to see if they could get that tissue back to life. And it's horrifying that they did this to people, but that's where that information came from. And believe it or not, the information that weight training can stunt your growth came from this place as well. So there were various studies that they would do where they would fracture the bones of various prisoners and then look at healing times, best ways to heal. And what they were trying to do is make it easier for them to help themselves on the battlefield when they sustained injuries, but what in fact they were doing was horrifyingly awful to the quote-unquote prisoners of war. One of the studies that they ran with these bone fractures was they would try to fracture the bones of adolescent children through the epiphyseal plate, which is more commonly known as the growth plate. So what they found was if you were able to fracture the bone through this growth plate, you could stop the long bones. So that's like your bones, like, so not like the bones in your hand, but like your femur, your tibia, your fibula, all those are considered long bones. You could stop the growth from that end. So if you don't have much of an anatomy background, like let's say this is like your femur, it's this long. All right. So you've got this part of it here and this part of it here where it attaches to other joints and, ligaments and muscles and all that kind of stuff. And right here by where this head is, there's a little line, all right, and it's called your epiphyseal plate, and that's where the bones grow, right? They don't grow all throughout. They grow right at that epiphyseal plate, and they will grow longer and longer and longer. Now, if you were to fracture this bone on the epiphyseal plate, this bone would fuse on this end, and this one would continue to get longer. So you can, in fact, if you break the bone of somebody whose epiphyseal plate has not sealed, you can stunt the growth of that specific bone. Now, horrifying that they did this. I can't imagine being a quote-unquote doctor or scientist that was doing these studies. I mean, we do them with rats today. These same types of studies have been done all throughout, the history of science, and it's something that we continue to do today in some respects to see how much force it takes to break bones. Pretty horrifying, but anyways. They took that information, right? And so force can break bones, and if it breaks the bone at the epiphyseal plate or the growth plate, then it can stop that part of the bone from growing. And what that turned into was, all right, well, weight training produces force, so weight training can fracture the bone at the epiphyseal plate and stop it from growing. That is quite the jump, right? To go from we're going to purposefully break these bones to you could break a bone weight training. Meanwhile, I don't know that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that bones get broken when training. I think, God, I don't know outside of maybe like your higher level Olympic lifting that you see those kinds of breaks at all. So to jump from that to that, quite the jump, quite the leap. Doctors would kind of preach this, weight training can stunt your growth because it can fracture the epiphyseal plate, and there's no evidence to suggest that at all. So, yes, if you fracture your fracture your bone at the epiphyseal plate, that end of the bone will stop growing, but that doesn't mean that weight training will break bones. And what's really odd to me is, let's say I've got a 100-pound kid who is able to squat 95 pounds for like 5. Let's say 130-pound kid, 140-pound kid, and he's able to squat 95 for 5 reps, right? So that's going to put his quote-unquote max somewhere around like 110, 105. And this kid to do 110 or 105, right, for one, right, which you're probably not going to have a kid that week like training ones anyways. You'd probably be 75, 80 pounds for higher volume, but that's beside the point. The amount of force generated in that 110-pound squat is not nearly what is generated when they're accelerating and decelerating on the field of play. So the forces that come into play when we're slowing down are upwards of like 2, 3, 4 times your body weight. When you're accelerating, if you're somebody who can accelerate like very efficiently, you're upwards of 5 times your body weight. So the force that this 130-pound kid squatting 110 pounds, more than likely probably closer to 75 to 85 pounds for higher volume, isn't even sniffing the 600-700 pounds of force that they have to overcome when they go to slow down or they go to land or they go to change direction. So to say that weight training will stunt your growth because of some study, quote unquote study, in World War II Japan, where they purposefully fractured bones at the epiphyseal plate, it's wild to me that ever caught fire and people ever thought that was like a real thing. So no, weight training will not stunt your growth. Theoretically, can it? Yes, but I don't know that there's a single instance of that ever happening. There's no data to support it, and there's actually data to point in the other direction that we're going to go over in a couple minutes here. So that was fairly long-winded, but I get really passionate about this because I'm very frustrated that this somehow has lingered 80 years later. We still use this fake information to try to keep people from wanting to weight train. And what that leads to is kids jumping into these quote-unquote speed and agility classes where they're not prepared to try to be fast or agile because they lack base levels of strength. Their mobility is very poor, and things like that. So I know this is a little bit like of an aside here, but if you are a parent watching, like, allow your kids to weight train as long as they're with like a good professional person who understands it and has a good track record. They should be weight training. It's very, very beneficial to them. So like, why do weights look scary to parents, right? Or people in general, right? When we know on the field of play, you're going to be overcoming and dealing with forces substantially higher than you ever would in the gym. Why is it the gym that gets demonized? Well, one, because it's foreign to a lot of people. You know how many people struggle to walk into the gym because they feel a little insecure? It's foreign. We don't do it every day. We see it a lot, or I see it a lot. It's in every single one of my social media news feeds. I see it all day in the gym. But it's not something that people deal with, on a regular and consistent basis. So it's kind of foreign to them. And then we can quantify it, right? So if I'm squatting 300 pounds, I know that's 300 pounds. If I'm slowing down on the field, I can't visualize how much force that is, right? So understanding and seeing that weight makes a lot of people think that it's a lot scarier, right? Plus, having 300 pounds on your back, right, loaded on your spine is something that's scary to a lot of people too. But again, we're talking about kids here who probably aren't going to have more than, I got a couple kids who, I got some strong kids here. I got a kid in middle school, or I had two of them that are both squatting like between 160 and 180. I've had some middle school kids hex bar deadlifting in a good position, mind you, upwards of like 315 to 350 pounds. We get some monsters in here, but it's because their parents allow me to do things with them that need to be done when they're at a young age. And we have like zero, I hesitate to say zero, but at this point, like zero overuse injuries when it comes to these kids. And that's been a theme throughout my professional career. So we can quantify it, right? So that makes it a lot more challenging to wrap your mind around the safety of it. We went over weight training stunting your growth, and how that will not happen. But what a lot of people don't know is it can actually help you achieve like your optimal muscle growth. It's kind of wild. There's a lot of studies showing this, and one of the most like kind of important ones was this study. I can't remember what year it was. It was either in the 90s or in the mid 2000s, where they looked at the limb length of tennis players, so adolescent tennis players. And they compared their dominant arm that they hit the ball with their arm that's not so dominant that they don't hit the ball with. And what they found was that their dominant hand, the one that hit the ball, actually grew a little bit longer and not just more dense in length. And these were kids who weren't really exposed to like weight training outside of tennis, because I don't know if you've been around tennis much, it is not a very like weight training friendly sport in a lot of areas. Some coaches really do get it and they figured it out and they make sure that their athletes are strong. But a good portion of them don't want them training at a young age because they want skill, 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 skill. And a lot of that is because they are the skills coaches. And if they're in the weight room, they're not on the court with you and you're not making any money. So just as an aside there, that's every sport, not just tennis. But they found that the length of the dominant arm was actually longer. And what they hypothesized and later found out was that hitting a ball is resistance training. Holding a racket is resistance training. And that resistance training helped that bone density and helped increase growth hormone, right, locally, which helped the bone grow to the length that it's supposed to be. So now all these kids that play tennis have like slightly different sized arms. But those muscles also hypertrophy, and the bone is going to grow in direct relation to how much the muscle hypertrophies from a density standpoint. And now we know from a length standpoint. So in addition to not stunting your growth, it can help you fulfill like your optimal bone length, which is quite wild that it is literally the opposite of what we've been told all throughout, the past 50, 60 years, however long. Went over like why weight training doesn't make you slow, right? Because if I can put more force in the ground, I can move faster. And there's a place where that carryover ends. I don't know where it is. I will say that if I have a 180-pound athlete that's able to hex bar deadlift 400 plus pounds, that's probably not like, say 150-pound athlete, hex bar deadlifting, 330 to 350 pounds, we're probably strong enough. I don't know that it is worth the effort that it takes to continuously try to get that athlete stronger, to maybe squeak out a little bit more speed, right? With the squat, I'd say like 1.5 times to 2 times body weight is probably where that carryover, it doesn't stop, but the return ends up getting quite diminished, right? So it takes a lot more effort to move that number up, and this athlete's not really going to get all that much faster because of that. But in the beginning, like increasing your base level of strength will absolutely help you move faster. It will not make you slow. And where did this come from? Is you had like back in the 70s, believe it or not, like football coaches used to not want their athletes in the gym. They hated it. And what started that was more than likely kids over the summer would go and they would lift weights, right? And this is back in the 70s and 80s, and everybody's a dummy and everybody's like training like a bodybuilder. So these athletes come back with the wrong adaptations and they are slower, right? They're bigger and they're slower. Their mobility sucks. And now coaches think, well, the gym's going to make my guys like slower and more muscle bound and less mobile. So we are not weight training. And that's where I'm assuming more than likely that came from. But that's not how it works at all. Weight training will absolutely help you jump higher, run faster, especially early on in the beginning. Another thing that I think is often overlooked when it comes to weight training in youth sports. I don't know if you've ever watched a Pop Warner football game, but man, it is intense, man. It like the speed at which those kids move, how hard they hit each other, how out of position they are when they go to hit each other. You could make the argument that it is substantially more dangerous not to lift weights. And the same can be said at 14U hockey when they first introduced hitting. Basketball as well, fighting for a position. Basketball is not a contact sport, but basketball is a contact sport in a lot of ways. Baseball too. There's some aspects of baseball that deal with contact, but you can make the argument that it's more dangerous not to weight train than to weight train for sure. Even if you thought the potential of getting hurt and stunting your growth did happen in the weight room, because if they're going to happen in the weight room, think about what's happening on the football field, right? So none of that is true. What we're going to go over now are a couple things like the benefits to kids' weight training. And there's a lot of them. We're going to touch on just some of the most important ones today. And the first one is injury prevention. Earlier, I talked about slowing down and changing direction, the amount of force that we have to overcome. You've got to be strong enough to get through that. So the stronger you are, the more resilient you are as an athlete. And we're talking now about like hamstring tears, non-contact ACL and MCL tears, things like that. A stronger athlete is going to be a more resilient athlete, right? A stronger athlete is also going to have like a higher work capacity, more than likely, which is going to allow them a higher level of conditioning. And if you know anything about youth sports, when do kids get hurt? It's when they're like out too long for a shift or they're exhausted. They start getting out of position, and that's when they get hurt. So a stronger athlete's going to be more resilient, it's going to have a higher work capacity, which will lead to like a little bit more conditioning, meaning they can just function at a higher level for longer, right? It doesn't mean cardiovascularly. It just means that they're able to recruit like more muscle fibers for longer so they can maintain the same like output. We went over bone density and growth, right? So weight training and resistance training in general will help bones reach like their full growth potential, but they also make them a lot more dense. And that's true with like one thing I didn't talk about earlier is like resistance training isn't just with weights. Think about, dude, running is resistance training, climbing is resistance training, jumping is resistance training. All the stuff that kids do, if you were to stick them out on like the jungle gym, that's all resistance training, right? It's all overcoming force. It's all having them use their muscles to move them in specific directions. It's just different, right? Speed and power is going to be positively influenced. Again, like my ability to accelerate is going to be a direct reflection of how much force I can put in the ground, especially that first step. Stronger I am, the faster I'm able to get out. The faster I'm able to change direction, the better body control I have when I go to change direction. And that goes right back into like injury prevention and being resilient. Increased flexibility and mobility. So this is something that a lot of people fail to understand. First off, like mobility and flexibility are very different. They're not the same. Mobility is your body's your ability to move within a joint, and flexibility is like the ability to like lengthen a muscle essentially. So flexibility is more passive, where mobility is more active. Flexibility is a direct reflection of your mobility. So your body is not going to allow you to get into positions it doesn't believe you can get out of. So if you're somebody who struggles to like squat to depth, it's because you lack strength in those ranges of motion. Now that could be maybe you lack some like in-range adductor strength or some like hip external rotation or even some internal rotation. Something is limiting you from being able to get depth because, again, your body's not going to let you get into positions it doesn't think you can get out of. So if I can increase my overall mobility, and weight training is an amazing way to do that, resistance training in general helps with mobility a ton, it's going to have a positive effect on the length of those muscles. So if your mobility sucks, your muscles don't have to like lengthen to the same degree that they would if you had better mobility. So weight training helps in a roundabout way. So it's going to help us gain more mobility, which is going to help us gain more flexibility. And I alluded to it earlier, but there are some studies that show that a stronger muscle allows the muscle spindles, which are like these little things in your muscle that detect like length and tension. You have like Golgi tendon organs and you have muscle spindles, and they can tell the muscle to like relax or like tighten down. And a stronger muscle is going to allow those muscle spindles to relax to allow you to get into a deeper stretch. So think about like if you've ever stretched before, after like 4 or 5 seconds, those muscle spindles they actually turn off a little bit, and you can get a little bit deeper into a stretch. That's what those are. That's kind of what they're responsible for. And a stronger muscle is going to tell them to calm down so that the muscle can be in a lengthened position easier. But yeah, so like mobility and flexibility are increased by weight training. The last one I want to touch on here, actually I have 2 more. Let me backtrack. Positioning, right? So in order for kids to learn how to do movements, a lot of times like you actually need a little bit of resistance. It's not because like they can't do it without it. It's that it's a great cue. Right, so if I have a kid who is trying to squat just body weight, and every time they go to drop their butt and get to a certain depth, all of a sudden they just curl up, right, and their back gets all rounded, and they can't maintain a good position. Like their hips are okay, knees are in a good position, their whole foot's on the ground, but they can't like keep their torso upright. All I have to do is hand them like a 10-pound dumbbell, and they can hold on to it here, right? And what is that? That's a cue to keep your chest up and keep your spine and your torso rigid. So that's another great way to like another great benefit of weight training is cueing into good positions. You can do the same thing with the lunge. If a kid struggles with the lunge, you can have them hold a dumbbell up here. Or if they struggle to like maintain their body position, you can have them hold one dumbbell, and now they've got to like fight to maintain position as they go through that movement. So it can be great for that. On top of the fact that like quote unquote core training is resistance training because you're fighting the resistance of gravity. So that's another big benefit. But the last one I want to talk about is confidence. Now, I can tell you, working with kids for as long as I have, it is unbelievable the confidence boost that getting stronger is. I had this young kid, I won't say his name, but the first time he came in, he was the kid who had to pretend to tie his shoes when it came to time to do something hard because he needed like another minute, or he had to go to the bathroom when it came time to do something hard. And by the end of this, man, this kid in 8th grade was deadlifting over 350 pounds in a really good position. This kid, as he got stronger, it was like he became a different person. His parents said it absolutely transferred onto the field because he had confidence. His game changed completely, and it's not just because he was faster and stronger and all that. It's because he had confidence. And when kids can see like quantitatively, I'm getting stronger, you'd be surprised like how amazing that is as far as like a confidence boost. I don't want to say ego, but some of them can develop a little bit of an ego. A lot of them will just develop a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and walk with a little bit more swagger. And if you've ever played sports, that is the funnest and best way to play a game is with that swagger. So injury prevention, bone density, and bone growth, speed and power, increased flexibility and mobility, positioning cues, increased confidence. There's so many benefits when it comes to weight training for kids. And it bothers me that we still have to talk about, the fact that it doesn't do any of these things that it's been like purported to do, right? Especially if you're working with a qualified strength and conditioning specialist, who understands adaptation and that not all training is the same, right? Squatting for a set of 12 is not the same as squatting for a set of 5. Shooting for a specific bar speed is not the same as going to failure. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to training that change the way that we adapt to these movements, and they're not all, everyone's not going to be a bodybuilder. It's just, that's not how the training goes. And if you are training like a bodybuilder for your sport, you need to find a new coach or figure out a new way to train, because that's not going to be training that transfers onto the field of play. All right, so we'll go ahead and end it there. I hope everybody learned something. Again, like weight training doesn't make you slow. It doesn't stunt your growth. It doesn't make you bulky. It doesn't diminish your mobility and flexibility. It, in fact, does the opposite of every single one of those things. And it's 2023, and hopefully we can all agree or understand at least that there is enough data and science there. I know science has taken a hit the past couple years, but there's enough data and science there to kind of eliminate all doubt when it comes to strength training when it comes to young kids, as long as they are training with a qualified professional. Again, one little caveat I will have here is if you have somebody who is not coaching them or cueing them into the proper positions, adding a load to that is going to make those movement patterns much worse. So if you're squatting and your hips are internally rotating and your knees are going in on the way down, guess what's going to happen? Because all that is your body decelerating itself. Guess what happens when you go to decelerate on the field of play? Hips internally rotate, knee goes in, and guess what that is? Mechanism number 1 for non-contact ACL tears. So you do need to be with somebody who knows what they're doing, but if you're hiring somebody, hopefully you've done your homework and you know that they are qualified enough to teach your child what needs to be done. So again, we will end it there. I've gone on a tirade here, been relatively long-winded. I think we're a little over half an hour now. It's a long episode, but again, I hope you learned something. Give us a like, subscribe, share it. I started a new YouTube channel called Fitness is Fatphobic, where I'm a little bit more talking culture and things like that. So if you're interested, head on over to that channel. I don't think we're going to release an audio only of that one, just because it's going to be a lot more video based. But go check that one out. We got one video up, kind of debunking the whole BMI is racist trope, and that's it. And we'll see you next time.
now stuck in the fight again.